That's where we're starting today. We're kicking off a new series going through the book of Colossians. It's just a 4-chapter book, and so we're going to go through it in 4 weeks, take a chapter a week. But there's much more than that there. So during the week, be reading through Colossians. We'll start chapter 1, but then 2 each week in November. Well, Paul opens chapter 1 by trying to explain how big and huge Jesus Christ is. And that he is sufficient, he is enough, he is bigger than anything we could ever think or imagine. I want to start with this thought this morning because I don't know if you've ever hit a point in your life when you doubted that God could do something for you. Whenever that happens to me, I think back on when he did something that was bigger than I could ever hope or imagine. When I say that, I think of a moment. Now, I've shared this with some of you a while ago, but I need to share it again today because it fits. But I was working on my first basketball missions trip to Cuba, and I was a college pastor in Wheaton outside Chicago. And so I had 21 college students in the room, and so I started going around the room. Okay, so tell me about your basketball experience. Who's played before? How much have you played? We went around the room. I had one basketball player. And I was like, no, this is going to be the worst trip ever. And then that week, I had a meeting with our elders to tell them about the trip. And I needed to tell them I had a team and try to convince them that it was okay for college students to go to a communist country where the penalty might be from our own Treasury Department 5 years in prison or a $250,000 fine for going, and trying to convince them this was a good idea. But I didn't have a team, and so I remember the night before the meeting that week, at 2 in the morning, I'm laying in bed saying, God, please just give me 4 players, just 4. It's not a lot, God. The next morning, I get to my office around 10. Chris Bonga, who was a student at Biola, calls me, and he says, Palmer, I hear you're planning this trip. He says, me and my buddy Andy want to come. I said, great, 2 of you. He said, no. We each want to bring a friend, 4 of us. I said, yes. So I hung up. I said, God, you're so huge. You're bigger than I thought could ever happen. And so I convinced everyone at the meeting that night. I had a team. We're good to go. I would be the player coach if I had to, carry them on my back. And then later that week, I get an email from the president of the Cuban Basketball Federation with our week schedule. And he has 5 games on 5 nights in 5 different Cuban cities, every night against the Cuban Olympic team. I was like, no way. I've had 5 gym rats. Not one has played college ball. What am I going to? So I went back to God. I said, okay, God, you were amazing last time. I need just one more request. I need 2 more players that are 6'6". I thought for some reason 2 players 6'6" would be respectable. And I gave God till Friday. And so, because it was coming up to the time. And so on Friday morning, seriously, I get to my office. I just started. 2 guys walked in. Bill Bedrosian from Taylor University and Doug O'Donnell from Wheaton College. And they said, Palmer, we want to go on the trip with you. Do you have room? I said, I sure do, but how tall are you guys? And Doug says, well, I'm 6'6". I said, and Bill Bedrosian says, well, I'm 6'6". I said, I thought so. And so I'm like, yes, God, you're so huge. Look at how big you are. And then I'm talking to coaches who had been to Cuba, just trying to get some life advice. And a college coach in Texas says, yes, I took a team there. And he said, Palmer, you're playing their Olympic team, and your tallest player is 6'6". He said, you're going to get killed. He said, their guards are 6'6". He said, their center is going to be over 7 foot, Palmer. You need some bigger players. So with all that encouraging feedback, I went back to God. I said, one more time, God. I said, I just need 2 more players. And I did. I said, please, God, you're so big, but 2 more that are 6'8". I didn't even know anybody 6'8". And I gave God till January 31st, about a week and a half. And I said, the trip is in March. If you don't give me 2 players that are 6'8", I'll take it as a sign, God, that it's a no, we shouldn't go. Well, we get to Friday, January 31st, and nobody's calling me back. I'd made dozens of calls. I'm about to go to bed. It's 9 at night, and my phone rings, and I answered, and it's a guy named Kyle on his way to play at Biola University. He said, Palmer, is it too late for me to go on your trip? I said, no, you can go, but how tall are you, Kyle? He says, I'm 6'8". I was like, yes, that's 1. Okay, God, 1. 15 minutes later, the phone rings again. A guy named Mark out of Messiah College in PA calls. And he says, Palmer, I want to go to Cuba. I said, Mark, you're not 6'8", are you? He said, yes, I am. How'd you know? Because God is bigger than. Jesus is bigger than our biggest request. And I go to bed and I'm so pumped, and then my phone rings. I can't go to sleep. It's 11 o'clock. The phone rings. I answer it. And here's another player. And he said he played at Louisiana Tech. And I said, and what position do you play? He says, well, I'm a center. I said, are you 6'8"? He says, no, I'm not 6'8". He says, I'm 6'11". I said, what? You see, God just wanted to show me that I was asking for little guys, 6'8", and he could give me something bigger than I ever imagined. Just to finish the story, we go to Cuba. Our first game is in a city named Matanzas. If you speak Spanish, you know that means massacre. And so we get there, and one of my gym rats, he's playing point guard. He buries a three. The crowd starts to cheer for us. We're up 3-0. Their big horse, their 7-foot guy, comes in the lane, and my center the boy from down in Louisiana throws it into the stands. And the scoreboard said, Cuba, USA. The crowd starts to chant, USA, that's us. And I'm like, this is happening. We're beating them. They beat us by 50. Just 50. And that was we did do better the rest of the week. Paul is writing to a church, not much different than ours, saying that you maybe have forgotten who Jesus Christ is. I see that you're starting to mix other things into following God, the Turkish gods, the church in the Colossian churches in Turkey, maybe the Greek gods, the Roman gods. They were forming a synchronistic religion. And so Paul comes along, he says, let me tell you about Jesus Christ. Because Jesus Christ has been here from the beginning. He is God, and he is enough. And he's bigger than whatever you face. So I want to start in verse 9 in Colossians 1. Since the day we heard about you, we have not stopped praying for you. We continually ask God to fill you with the knowledge of his will through all wisdom and understanding that the Spirit gives, so that you may live a life worthy of the Lord and please him in every way, bearing fruit in every good work, growing in the knowledge of God. And so here now he explains what this knowledge is. Here's what I want you to know, verse 15. Know that Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. He existed before anything was created, and he is supreme over all creation. Underline that line in your Bibles. Verse 16, for through him God created everything in the heavenly realms and everything on earth, and made the things we can see and the things we can't see, such as thrones, kingdoms, rulers, and authorities in the unseen world. Everything was created through him and for him. He existed before everything else, and he holds all creation together. So do you see how Paul is starting with the universe and saying Jesus and God are one? He was here from the beginning. He was here when the world was created, and he's still in control of it all. And he's bigger than, he's greater than whatever you can think or imagine or whatever need that you might have. One of my favorite questions that's posed by the theologian and writer, his name is A.W. Tozer, in his short classic read, Knowledge of the Holy, he asks this question. He says, what is the most important thing about you? And maybe you've never heard that question posed, but if I were to ask you, what is the most important thing about you? How would you answer that? You might say, well, maybe it's my career or it's my family. Those are good things. Those are not bad things. Maybe you would say it's my degree. It's what I know. It's my abilities that I have. Those are all good things. But then Tozer answers the question and he says, the most important thing about you is what you think about when you think about God. What are your thoughts? What your thoughts are when you think about God. When you think about Jesus Christ, do you have a grand, huge, enormous picture of him, knowing that he can do anything? Or is your picture of Jesus Christ small? I think sometimes we forget the size of God, and Paul uses this word in verse 15. He says, he is supreme. And I don't know if we're all praying to or believing in and trusting a supreme Jesus. I think maybe I'll say it like this. Maybe sometimes instead of praying to a supreme Jesus, we pray to a small Jesus, or we pray to a suburban Jesus. I've done all my years in the pastorate in the suburbs of LA, the suburbs of Chicago, the suburbs of Phoenix. And I hear, and we as Christians in the suburbs, sometimes we just pray really nice, small prayers to God, suburban prayers. For example, maybe you prayed this week, God, I'm going there now. Please open up a parking spot at Costco right by the front door. Because Costco's a zoo you know this, God. It's a zoo on the weekends. Jesus, just give me a spot. People are coming out with 24 packs of muffins for a family of 3. They'll never eat them before they go stale. But it's so crazy. Or, Jesus, my neighbor, he keeps blowing his leaves over my wall into the pool. Can you please work on the heart of my neighbor? Jesus, you know my son, he's not starting right now in the basketball team. And you know he's better than the kid with the long hair and the freckles. If you're wondering which one, God, number 24. God, can you help the coach to see he's better? I'm not saying he should sprain an ankle, maybe just turf toe, something like that. Jesus, you know I didn't study for midterms, but Jesus, I need an A. Just help me get an A. I'll study next time. If I graduate with honors, I'm giving you the first 5 years, 15%, not 10. Forget about 10. It's going to be 15. Those are good suburban prayers, aren't they? We pray that. I think sometimes we forget that we worship a God, that Jesus Christ is the creator of the universe, and that our prayers need to be huge. Here's what Paul says in verse 15. He says, Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. He existed before everything was created, and he is supreme over all. He has control of it all, because through him everything was created in heaven and on earth below. When Paul uses the word supreme, I thought a lot about it this week, and I think we've cheapened the word supreme, haven't we? Because really, the only time we use the word supreme, if you think about it, you try to work it into a sentence. You'll only use it when you're ordering pizza or a taco. And I need to just share have a moment of honesty with you. This last Sunday after the World Series, it's like 8 at night, and I was hungry. And my wife says, well, I'm not cooking. There's just 2 of us at home. So I've never done this before. I'm in the early stages of being an empty nester, no sons at home. I got in my car, and I drove out looking for fast food. And I was like, usually you have the kids in the back seats. They go, yeah, Big Mac's around, and you eat with them. But now I'm out looking for something just for myself. So I went where you would have gone. I went to Taco Bell. And my sons, I'd heard them order a Crunch Wrap Supreme, and it just sounded good. And so I ordered the Crunch Wrap Supreme. As I'm picking it up, I just felt some indignation, ordering this by myself. But when I ate it, I had no regrets. I mean, it was supreme. It was that good. I even asked my wife, is this really meat in here? It tastes like meat. I think it's meat. She said she didn't know. But we don't use the word supreme to talk about Jesus Christ. And Paul says he's supreme over all. And I have this line on the screen just to remind you that this week, I don't know what you're facing. I don't know what trouble you're up against. But I want you to know that Jesus is bigger than. He's bigger than a lost job. He's bigger than an addiction that you need to end. Jesus is bigger than a rebelling son or a rebelling daughter. Jesus is bigger than a marital conflict that maybe you're having right now. Jesus is bigger than a sickness that you're fighting or some kind of affliction. He's bigger than all of that. And I just want you to step back and see that. Here's how the psalmist David writes it. This is Psalm 50. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. Think about that. He owns the jobs in 1,000 businesses. So yours isn't going so well. Don't sweat it. He's bigger than that. He owns the degrees in 1,000 universities. You think you can't finish college, or you think you can't get the master's degree. He owns the degrees in 1,000 businesses. Your car is breaking down, and it's in the shop all the time. I've been there. He owns the cars on 1,000 lots. He has something for you, bigger and better than you've imagined. And so whatever you're wrestling with, dealing with this week, I want you to turn it over to him. Here's how Paul says it in verse 11. Let's go back to chapter 1. And he says, you are being strengthened with all power according to his glorious might. He says, he's giving you strength and power. If you feel weak today, then ask God for his strength and power. If you feel discouraged, then he has strength and power. And he gives us this strength and power for whatever you're trying to accomplish in life. If you're starting a new business on your own, then you need strength and power from God. If you're applying to college for the first time, or you're applying for a master's degree, you're trying to finish it, you need strength and power. If you're trying to resist temptation, then ask him for strength and power. If you need to stand up and be a voice for someone who's been discriminated against, ask him for strength and power. Here's how Paul goes on to say it when he writes to the Philippian church. He says, this is 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And then in Romans 8:31 we read, if God is for us, who can be against us? And so Paul, as we go back to chapter 1, verse 15, 16, he says, look up at the heavenly realms. He says, look up at the universe that God has created. Jesus is in control of it all. And so I have a take-home assignment for you. Maybe you haven't done this in a while. But I think trying to understand Jesus without looking up it's like trying to study astronomy without going outside of a classroom. And so your take-home assignment is this. I want you, when you get home tonight, maybe with a friend or a spouse or your kids, go find a dark corner in your backyard or a park near your house, or maybe drive out in the desert, and then just look up at the universe. Because I think all of the light pollution from our street lights, it clouds our view of the sky. And if you see someone in a clown mask, when you go out, just run and go home. But otherwise, stay out there. And my sons have showed me this app. It's called Skyview. We need sons and daughters to show us apps. And this one is Skyview. You can download it right now. And we don't have a Wi-Fi signal in here, by the way, but you can use your cell phone signal. So, but at Skyview, you can hold it up and point it at any star, any planet, and it will magnify it, give you the name of it, and it's just a reminder that Jesus is bigger than whatever you're facing right now. All right, I have two thoughts that I want to share with you. The second is from verse 17, where Paul reminds us that Jesus holds life together. We continue, he existed before anything else, and he holds all creation together. So here's the thing. Paul is reminding us that Jesus and God are one. He created the universe, but he hasn't abandoned it, and he holds it together. And he created you, but he hasn't abandoned you, and he holds your life together. I think sometimes we feel like life is spinning out of control. We're feeling like we can't hold it together. And Paul reminds us that Jesus is the glue of life. I have this key idea on the screen that I hope you take it home as just as a reminder when life feels like it's coming apart. Give Jesus Christ your trouble. He's bigger than whatever you face, and he holds it all together on the days that we can't. It's kind of like this. I don't know if you've thought about the fact that every book is bound by glue. There's a hot glue method that they use to glue the binding of every book, even this Bible, together. That's what holds books together. And your life is kind of like this. Your life is like a book, and the story has many pages, many, many pages. But Jesus Christ holds it together. He's the glue of life. And the trouble for us is that when we go through the pages of our life story, we go through them one at a time, and we can only see them one at a time. But Jesus Christ holds your life in his hands. He's the glue of life, and he sees it all, and he has this great, beautiful, perfect plan for your life. I don't know what you will face this week. I don't know what trouble or problem will be in front of you, and maybe you don't know, but I do know what God wants you to do in that moment. He wants you to say, Jesus, here is my trouble. Here is my problem. Would you hold my life together for me, because I can't. And I say that because I wonder if right now, maybe you are trying to control things that only God can control. Most of us, let me say that again, most of us go through life trying to control things and circumstances that only God can control. Some of you are trying to control a coworker, and they're impossible. Some of you are trying to control a friendship. You want someone to like you more and want to hang out more, and you just can't control some things. Some of you want to control a husband or a wife. Maybe you're here by yourself this morning and you're married and your spouse wouldn't come with you, and you've been trying to force that husband or wife to follow God with you. Maybe it's time for you to say, God, I can't control her life or his life, but you are in control. So I'm handing it over to you. Maybe you're raising kids, and you're as they get older, the older they get, the harder it is to control them. Maybe it's time for you to say, God, I can't do that anymore. I need you to. It's like, remember teaching, if you have sons or daughters, teaching your son or your daughter to ride a bicycle off the tricycle. And you know, every father or mother has done this. You grab the back of their seat and they start pedaling. You've taken the training wheels off and you're running like mad. And you're running faster than you have since high school track. And you don't want to let go because you're afraid. You know if you let go, they're probably going to crash. They're just learning. But you have to let go, right? You have to let go. Otherwise, they never learn to ride. And yes, they'll hit the telephone pole, and they're going to run into the bushes in the neighbor's car. But they'll get up. They'll be okay. Just put a helmet on them. You try to run alongside them, but you have to let go and start to trust God with their life. It gets harder as they get older, I promise you. When they turn 16, they'll want a car. And I made the mistake of buying my son, when he turned 16, a 10-year-old Honda Civic. I thought I bought him some slow 4-cylinder car. I didn't know he thought I just bought him Fast and Furious, because that's what had been featured in the movies. And so I made a big mistake, and he's flying around town. I wanted to follow him to school just to make sure he put his blinker on and seatbelt on. But that's creepy. I couldn't. But your sons and daughters one day will move out. You can't keep controlling them, but God has control of it all. And there has to come that point in your life. I think one of the hardest things for us to do as Christians is, rather than trying to harder to control things, is to say, God, I'm just going to trust you with it. I can't do it anymore. I think even as church people, we come here on Sundays, and maybe you've grown up like this. We think we're supposed to act like life is perfect, like we've got it all under control. I want to say you don't have to act like that anymore. We try to act like our marriages are perfect, or we try to act like our kids are perfect and they brush their teeth and they got A's and they don't. We try to act like our job is perfect and our finances are perfect, but we end up with credit card debt, and those things happen. But Jesus Christ can control those things, and you don't have to be the person in charge of it all. That's why Paul says this. He says, verse 17, He is before all things, and in Him all things are held together. He holds it all. I don't know where you are this week. I don't know what problems you face, but you probably are dealing to some degree with a three-headed monster of worry, stress, and anxiety. And I don't know which one comes first, stress, worry, anxiety, but we all fight those battles. And we worry about things that maybe will never happen. We worry about things and we get stressed over things we don't have any control over. And if you're worried and stressed and anxious about something today, I'll read in a moment. Paul says He's the God of peace. Jesus Christ fills our life with peace. You don't have to be the one who controls it all. As the lead pastor of the Grove, I worry a lot, especially in July and October, about our finances. I do. I lay in bed at like 3 a.m, and this week this is my new discipline, is to let God have it, because I lay in bed at 3 a.m. going, we have 25 ministry staff here who have husbands and wives and sons and daughters that we need to take care of. And then we have people in other countries. We pay 100% of what they live on. And we can only give when we have enough. And so in months like October, I really stress myself out and get all anxious and worried. And this week it hit me. No, Palmer, this is not my church. This is Jesus' church. This is your church. This is our church together. And that burden isn't just for one person to carry, it's for Christ to carry for us. He controls all of our hearts collectively and all of what we give and how generous we are. And so I'm starting to have peace. I'm trying to practice this too. But that's where I am. In Psalm 46:10, David makes this brilliant observation. He says, "Let go of your concerns." This is out of the Message Bible. "Then you will know that I am God. I rule the nations. I rule the earth." Maybe write those words down. Psalm 46:10, "Let go of your concerns. Then you will know that I am God. I rule the nations. I rule the earth." He holds it all together. I want to close with this. There's a pastor, speaker, writer named Louis Giglio. He lives in Atlanta. He leads Passion City. He started the Passion movement. And Louis talks about a time not long ago he was speaking in Tyler, Texas. And he'd finished speaking, and a gentleman came up and said, "Well, where are you speaking next, Louis, and what are you speaking on?" And he says, "Well, I'm heading back to my church in Atlanta, and I'm speaking on the greatness of God and how we see the greatness of God in the human body." And the man says, "Well, that's fascinating. I'm a professor of molecular biology at UT Tyler. Tell me what you're speaking about, Louis. That's great stuff." So Louis says, "Man, I wasn't ready to present in front of a molecular biologist, but I did my best to try to tell him how the body helps us see the greatness of God." And then when he's done, he says, "Well, is that all, Louis?" And Louis says, "That's all I've got right now." And so this molecular biologist says, "Well, Louis, you have to tell your people about laminin." And Louis says, "What's laminin?" He says, "Laminin is the glue of the human body. Laminin is a protein molecule, and it's a protein molecule that holds the cell walls together. Without it, the body falls apart. It's the rebar of the human body, Louis. You have to tell your people about laminin." So Louis says, "Okay, I'll tell them about laminin. I'm sure it will change their lives." And he says, "Okay, Louis, do you know what laminin looks like? Because you might listen to what I'm saying." And Louis says, "I don't even know how to spell laminin." He says, "All right." So he writes it on a card, Laminin. He says, "When you get back to your hotel, open your laptop and look at Google Images." And so when Louis does, he says he can't believe what he sees. And this is a picture that comes up. And biologists draw laminin in the shape of a cross. And it's just not by chance, because then Louis emails him back and says, "This is amazing. I've never seen laminin." He says, "Do you want to see a picture of laminin from an electronic microscope?" And he sends Louis this. And it really is this bonding agent, this glue of the human body. It sits in us, thousands and thousands, 10,000 to 60,000 protein molecules sit in our body in the shape of a cross. Now, maybe it's just a coincidence, maybe it's just a good illustration, but if you're wondering or if you're feeling like life is falling apart, I just want to remind you that you have proteins in your body in the shape of a cross, and maybe you don't have to look any further than your own body, your own life, to see that Jesus Christ can hold your life together when you feel like it's all coming apart and you feel desperate and you're scared and you're afraid. And so Paul ends with this in verse 20. "He made peace with everything in heaven and on earth by means of Christ's blood on the cross." So Paul comes back and he says, you can have peace when you believe and understand Jesus Christ's work on the cross for you. Then you can understand that he is able to hold it all together, that he is bigger than whatever you face. But it comes back to the cross of Christ. It comes back to giving him your life and then trusting him. He's not abandoned you. He's holding your life together, but you have to let him.